By making Juneteenth a federal holiday, all Americans can feel the power of this day and learn from our history. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
All right.
On June 17, 2021, Joe Biden signed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, which made Juneteenth the 11th federal holiday, the newest since Martin Luther King Jr. Day was established in 1983. On the surface, the story seems pretty straightforward. The slaves were freed in 1865, then when their descendants celebrated the end of slavery with Juneteenth, and in 2021 it became a national holiday. But the stories behind why holidays exist is almost never straightforward. Instead of being some linear and natural process, they're usually not linear. They're the product of colliding historical and cultural forces that combine in just the right way at just the right time, and Juneteenth is no different. So, how did we get here? In this video, I will provide a brief overview of the history of Juneteenth and offer an explanation to answer the question, how did Juneteenth become a federal holiday? Well, first, let's talk about what Juneteenth is. Juneteenth is celebrated on June 19th and commemorates June 19th, 1865, the day that Union General Gordon Granger arrived in Galveston, Texas to announce that all slaves were now free due to the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, here's a quick note of historical accuracy. The Emancipation Proclamation itself did not end slavery. Rather, it declared that all persons held as slaves within rebellious states are, and henceforward, shall be free. Issued on January 1st, 1863, it was a calculated political move by Abraham Lincoln to aid the war effort. The Emancipation Proclamation was a military order that only went into effect after the Confederate States were occupied by government forces. This accomplished a few things. It added a moral dimension to the war, which helped appease Northern abolitionists and justify the hundreds of thousands of deaths. It also enabled and encouraged the enlistment of over 200,000 Black Americans, whose manpower was desperately needed by Union forces. Lastly, it bolstered the Union's will to win, because victory now meant liberty. So, on one hand, this additional background helps explain why East Texan slaves weren't freed until June 19, 1865, because Union troops had to physically go state to state and plantation to plantation to liberate the South. But on the other hand, and this is very important to the story of Juneteenth, this demonstrates how the Emancipation Proclamation, the freedom document that, alongside the 13th Amendment, officially ended slavery in the United States, did not come about as some sort of moral necessity, but as a result of political calculus. Abraham Lincoln didn't free the slaves because he saw it as an absolute moral evil that ought not to exist. He freed the slaves because it made political sense. I'm going to put a pin in this because we're going to come back to this theme later. But as you may have noticed by now, so far, Juneteenth is the story of Texas. It commemorates the day that Texans learned of their freedom, but slavery existed throughout the entire country. So did everyone celebrate Juneteenth? Well, no. There were different celebrations of freedom. A lot of different celebrations. Here's a list of just a few dates. January 1st. February 1st, May 5th, May 8th, May 9th, May 20th, May 22nd, May 28th, May 29th, June 19th, July 4th, August 1st, August 4th, August 8th, September 22nd, and October 1st. These dates are sourced from an article by a researcher named William Higgins titled Lift Every Voice, a study of Afro-American emancipation celebrations, published in 1974. He describes how some of these dates commemorate the date of certain emancipations of freedom, such as Juneteenth and January 1st, which honors the day the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. Other days just sort of came to be, such as May 5th and August 4th. You can see here which date falls into which category. Of these celebrations, some were sacred and some were secular. Secular celebrations, such as August 8th, drew heavily from American rituals and culture. They often feature parades, floats, sports, and picnics. Here's a description of an August 8th celebration in Kentucky according to Miss Benny Mae Smith. The Methodists had their picnics at their church, and the Baptists would have theirs at their church. I remember at one church, the band was standing up playing Will There Be a Star in My Crown, and the other band at the other church started playing No, Not One. Well, there was always a lot of fun. I mean, I could talk about it from one year to another. Sacred celebrations like February 1st, on the other hand, were based upon the rituals and culture of the Black church. These were typically centered around a Sunday church service and the singing of freedom songs, like Lift Every Voice and Sing and Go Down Moses, and the reading of freedom documents like the Declaration of Independence and the Emancipation Proclamation. Both sacred and secular celebrations surged in popularity during the 1920s and subsequently saw their popularity plunge in the 1940s, and Juneteenth was no different. It was also a secular celebration full of games and baseball. Here's a description for one of the baseball games. I come up with 2 outs, 2 strikes, and I hit the ball right across the center field fence. And man, you talk about, and this was money now. And we had such a crowd out there in those days. Tell you what they do. They'd split the money equally among the players. And we had, our portion for the day was about $4 a man on our side. And when they got through having a timed out there, they'd take me up to $16. And like other celebrations, Juneteenth's popularity also fell in the 1940s. What's really interesting about Higgins' research is that when he published it in 1974, which was just 48 years ago, Juneteenth was just another regional holiday. Higgins thought the January 1st celebration was the most viable of the emancipation celebrations. Its geographical influence was growing and had replaced May 28th, September 22nd, and April 16th celebrations in different parts of the country and coexisted with Juneteenth in Louisiana. But here we are less than 50 years later with Juneteenth as a federal holiday. So what happened? Well, Juneteenth started spreading around the country. Higgins himself noted the growing seeds of this popularity, saying, "The Black Power movement of the 1960s had caused a Neo-Emancipation Day celebration movement. Juneteenth has taken place in Oklahoma City courtesy of the Black Liberated Arts Center." And this is essentially what happened. Pro-Black movements across the country increasingly preferenced Juneteenth celebrations, and Juneteenth itself was spreading due to Texan migrants taking the tradition with them all across the country. In 1974, Houston revived their Juneteenth celebrations, and the next year, 30,000 people attended Juneteenth festivities in Fort Worth. Milwaukee's 1978 celebration brought out 100,000 people, and the 1980s saw major celebrations in California, Wisconsin, Illinois, Georgia, and Washington, D.C. Juneteenth also saw increasing official recognition. Starting with Texas in 1979, by 2020, 47 states and Washington, D.C. had recognized it, though only Texas observed it as a legal paid holiday. Again, 2 years ago, only Texas observed it as a legal paid holiday, but today, at the end of 2022, 21 states and Washington, D.C. observe it as a legal paid holiday, and so does the federal government. So what happened? Well, in short, 2020 happened.
The breaking news, stay at home. That is the order tonight.
The National Guard, nowhere to be seen.
CNN projects Joseph R. Biden Jr. is elected the 46th president of the United States.
This is a fraud.
The knee in George Floyd's neck was the catalyst for the protests, but the long shadow of slavery is what really colored that summer. With life ground to a standstill, the unadulterated weight of slavery's legacy and its lingering effects was obvious to all. And like I mentioned earlier, 2020 was an election year. Both Trump and Biden attempted to attract the black vote via Juneteenth, with Trump promising to make it a federal holiday and Biden publicly celebrating it on the campaign trail. Once Biden got into office, Congress passed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act, which Joe Biden then signed and made law on June 17, 2021. But still, why all of a sudden? Now, remember earlier when I said that Abraham Lincoln's decision to issue the Emancipation Proclamation was a move of political calculus? Well, let's see if that applies to Joe Biden as well. We can very clearly see the joint influence of the COVID-19 pandemic and the racial tensions in Joe Biden's official statement on Juneteenth, which read, "There is still more work to do. As we emerge from the long, dark winter of the COVID-19 pandemic, for example, racial equity remains at the heart of our efforts to vaccinate the nation and beat the virus. We must recognize that Black Americans, among other people of color, have shouldered the disproportionate burden of loss, while also carrying us through disproportionately as essential workers and healthcare providers on the front line of the crisis." And Joe Biden's successful campaign message leaned heavily on both of these themes. And it's not like there weren't attempts before 2020 to make Juneteenth a federal holiday. In 2016, 90-year-old retired Texas schoolteacher Opal Lee walked from Texas to D.C. to advocate for a federal Juneteenth holiday. In conclusion, I think it's interesting to see how two defining moments of the United States' relationship with slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation and the formal recognition of Juneteenth, resulted from specific political contexts. Had slavery's legacy not suffocated the life out of George Floyd while everyone sat at home, would we have official recognition of Juneteenth? Juneteenth began as a local celebration of emancipation in East Texas and slowly grew to become the dominant Black celebration of emancipation over the following centuries, and became officially enshrined as a federal holiday amidst a period of domestic tension unseen in generations.